Hey friends, it is so good to be with you again tonight. I just want to say how much I really appreciate, adore, and love each and every one of you. I love the fact that you prioritize community and doing life together, and as all of you are sitting together in a life group. And my hope and prayer each week is that you will continue to make life groups a priority, continue to meeting with others who are desiring to grow in their relationship with Jesus, whether that's asking questions or just processing life. I am just so impressed and blessed and happy that this is how you are choosing to spend your Sunday nights. Friends, I just wanted to give a little bit of a recap of our message from last Wednesday, as I know that there's some of you that just aren't able to make it. And so just because you're not with us on a Wednesday, please do not take it that we don't miss you or have forgotten about you. We do miss you, and we do hope that there are times that you're able to come on a Wednesday and gather with us for worship and for laughter and for a little bit longer of a message than what you get on here. And so yeah, I just wanted you guys to be aware of that. And so without further ado, I am just going to get started because, as you all know, I could talk forever. So we are continuing our series. We're in week 3 of our series called Faith in an Anxious World. And so we've been just tackling anxiety. We've been talking about anxiety. We've been talking about depression. We've been talking about healthy coping mechanisms, mindfulness, and we've been talking about the importance of community and surrounding yourself with people who are good for you versus those that are not that good for you, maybe more toxic. And so this week we're going to be talking about life in a hurting world, because the reality is this world hurts, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes on in our world that hurts us, that affects us, that causes us to lament, that causes us to grieve. That causes us, at least for me sometimes, to say, oh my word, what is happening? And so I wanted to talk about that tonight. And if you haven't already, I'd love for you guys to go through the passage in which we're talking, in which I'm talking about tonight, and that is in Luke. And it's chapter 8, and it's verses 40 through 56. So it's about a big chunk of scripture, but it is chock full of some really great stuff that I wanted to touch upon tonight. And primarily in that story, there are, it talks about 2 people in particular. There is a woman who has been sick for 12 years with no hope in sight for a cure. She is bleeding. And there's also the mention of a girl who's about 12 years old, and she has just passed away. And so looking at these 2 characters, I would say they were and had experienced life in a hurting world. And they have, there's a lot of things. Their situations are different, right? One woman is suffering from a condition that she's had for a long time. The other is a young girl who actually ends up passing away. And so even though both situations are pretty hopeless, pretty hard, there are some noticeable differences between the 2. And the first one is that the woman is completely alone. In the passage you read that she approaches Jesus alone. More than likely, society has deemed her unclean and has outcast her because of her illness. And so she comes to Jesus completely alone. Whereas the girl, on the other hand, the girl's father is coming to plead on her behalf. So it seems like the girl comes from a very loving family who is surrounded with good people who care for her and love her. But the one thing, even though those things are both different, there is one thing. Both people in this story are disconnected from other people around them because of something they can't control, and that's their health. Right? They can't control their health. The woman couldn't control the fact that she had been suffering from bleeding for the last 12 years, and the girl couldn't help the fact that she had a health condition that led her to passing away. And so So their health is what disconnected them from other people. And maybe you can relate with that, right? Like maybe you can relate to feeling alone in your anxiety, or you can feel alone in the depression that you experience and that no one understands. And that's the one distinctive thing that separates you from people, is your mental illness that you're experiencing. And so what I want you to notice in this passage, though, is that though they are experiencing health issues and concerns, and though the woman is alone and suffering from this, and though the girl is dying and her dad comes, there's a really significant thing that happens in this passage, and that is that Jesus stops. Right? Like Jesus was more than likely on his way to somewhere, because Jesus is always on his way to somewhere as we read through scripture. But Jesus stops. Not only does he stop to see who touched his cloak and who was healed, but he also stops when the girl's father comes and says, "Can you please come to our house, for my daughter is dying." I'm sure he had other things that going on, but Jesus stops. And that's so significant, my friends, to remember that as we go through really hard times, and whether that be anxiety that is like a social anxiety, like a situational anxiety, I should say, like, an anxiety before a test, or an anxiety that you have before having a conversation with someone, or anxiety that you have before giving a speech or something, whether it's that type of anxiety or an anxiety that is really debilitating, meaning that it's really affecting your life in significant ways that prevent you from hanging out with friends, or that prevents you from going to school, or prevents you from wanting to leave the house or whatnot. Whatever type of anxiety that you are experiencing, whatever mental illness that you're experiencing, it's so important to know that Jesus stops, right? He stops. He so could have said, when he felt his power go out, he so could have said nothing. But he insisted on meeting this woman. He insisted on asking, who is it? Because that woman is significant. That woman needed to know that she is significant, that she is seen, that she is worthy, that she is not an outcast, probably like she had felt her entire life. And Jesus wanted to change that narrative and say, hey, just because of your health condition does not discredit you from my love, does not discredit you from being in my presence, does not discredit you from being worthy of getting better, worthy of being seen. And the same thing is with the girl, right? Like Jesus was on his way, but he stopped and he said, that young woman is important enough to me to where I'm going to change my path and I'm going to go there. And we see later on in the story that, someone from the house came and said, don't worry anymore. She has already passed. And Jesus said, no, I'm going to go. And he continued to go. Why? Because Jesus sees us. He sees those women and us and you as worthy, as significant. He gets in your boat. Remember from the previous weeks, I always talked about that Jesus joins us in our anxiety. He doesn't cause those things in our lives. Those things are in our lives. But he doesn't cause it, but he joins us so that we know that we're not alone. And Jesus is showing us in this passage that not only are we not alone, but we are worthy and we are significant of his time, of his healing, of his attention, right? Of his wisdom, of his presence, And so Jesus stops. He sees, he listens, he does not leave. It doesn't matter how old someone is. It doesn't matter how hopeless their situation is. It doesn't matter what everyone else thinks. When his people are hurting, Jesus stops. When you are hurting, you are his top priority, and he stops and he's there. And here's the thing, your anxiety, your depression, it may have you think that he isn't, that he doesn't care, that no one cares. But friends, that cannot be farther from the truth, because we see it. We see it in his word. Jesus always meets people where they're at. And so what I love about this passage is that it's so relatable. It's so beautiful to know that Jesus doesn't shame or condemn, but he recognizes us and he sees us in our pain and in our suffering and in our anxiety and in our depression. And he doesn't leave us, but he meets us. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about anxiety. And Jory brought it to my attention the other day that she loves you guys so much that she wanted to be sure that, you guys understood the difference between, like a situational anxiety versus an anxiety that can be a little bit debilitating. And so my goal is not for every single one of you to leave this series and to self-diagnose yourself with anxiety or depression. That's not my intention whatsoever, but I do want to bring clarity to those issues because it isn't something that we talk about a lot in church. And so there are levels of anxiety that are not debilitating to our lives, that don't necessarily require you to see a professional counselor or whatnot, but there are levels of anxiety that do cause us to maybe need to do some mindfulness activities. For example, every time I have to host on a Sunday, I get anxious. I get really anxious. I don't know what it is. The adults, they freak me out. I prefer to be with students. And so I get anxious every Sunday. And so there is a time where I have to either go in my office or be backstage and I have to do some mindfulness. And I have to remind myself of, Meredith, everything's going to be okay. This isn't the end of the world. You may mispronounce a word. You may stutter. You may mix up, but it's okay. God still loves me. He's called me here for a reason. And he's going to be there for me whether I do a great job or whether I do a bad job, because he's got me. And so I get anxious like that. But there are other situations where people have anxiety that is more of a disorder, and it prevents them from going to school, it prevents them from hanging out with friends. It starts to take over their lives in ways that are unhealthy rather than healthy, where the coping mechanisms alone are not working. And so I wanted to be sure to kind of tell you guys to kind of bring that up and to recognize the difference between that. And that no matter what level of anxiety that you are experiencing, there are healthy coping mechanisms. It is important to surround yourself with people, to have someone to talk to know that you're not alone, and to invite God into that, right? Invite God, invite others into that, and to listen and respond. And so I do want to talk about, though, when anxiety, an unhealthy anxiety, not, the anxiety that I get before going on stage, or not the anxiety that you may experience before going out on the field or on the court or, taking a test. The unhealthy anxiety, that type of anxiety, that can impact your life in significant ways that, if left untreated, can lead to depression. It's scientifically shown that 9 times out of 10, anxiety leads to depression. There are times where we can get depressed and we're not anxious, but a lot of times anxiety that is not treated, the anxiety that is over and over and over again, right, left untreated and just figuring, we can just forget about it. That type of anxiety can lead to depression. And I'm not just saying like a little bit depressed. I'm talking significantly depressed. I shared on Wednesday that, with COVID, I have experienced a level of depression. And mine is an example of where it wasn't really anxiety driven, but it was because it was COVID and I wasn't able to see people, and my job changed without my, without anything I could do about it. Or some people get seasonal affective disorder, which is in wintertime, they have a harder time just getting up and being motivated. And that's not the depression that I'm talking about. I'm talking about major depressive disorder. The major depressive disorder that happens when you can't get out of bed and you don't want to see the light of day, when you're not going to, maybe if you guys have a job, you're constantly calling in work and canceling. You're constantly canceling on friends and you don't want to hang out with anybody. You are more and more isolating yourself. You're not eating. You're not taking care of yourself. I'm talking about that type of major depressive disorder. And why I want to bring that up is because with major depressive disorder, it leads us to think or to do things that are dangerous or harmful to us. And major depressive disorder, it can lead to suicide, thoughts of suicide or suicide in itself, or even self-harm if left untreated. And so many of you may be sitting there and you may not be experiencing this, but you may know of someone that is going through this. And so it's important for you as someone's support system to understand that how debilitating this can be and how important it is for you as someone that maybe is witnessing this in someone else's life to reach out, to pull in a trusted adult for help. Because major depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, those are really big things. And they are things. It's not a lack of faith, right? It is a mental illness. And it's not a life sentence. It's treatable. If you're experiencing these things, that doesn't mean you're going to experience them the rest of your life. It just means that right here, right now, maybe you are experiencing them, but there is hope. And there are things that you can do to move out of the place that you're at right now. And so some of those things are talking to someone, right? Like it's so important to talk to someone, to let them in. If you are having thoughts of harming yourself, of self-harm or suicide, it's so important to let someone know about that. Sometimes there's shame and guilt associated with that, and we don't want people to know those things because we don't want them to think of us differently. But the reality is that we want you here. And so reaching out to someone, allowing them in, just like the woman, right, reached out, right? She had to leave her town to meet Jesus where she was at or where he was at. Just like the father had to leave his home to come and ask Jesus. The same is true for you. Right? When you're experiencing these levels of anxiety or depression, whatever level it is, I think no matter where you're at, you should reach out to people. We see that in the word, in the scripture today. Both the woman and the girl's father, they reached out. They said they had to leave the situation in which they were in and say, you know what? I need to go get help. There's no shame in that. There's no shame in that at all. And so for others, depending on your level of anxiety or depression, it could be breathing exercises. And I know that may sound a little bit stupid, like Meredith, really breathing exercises, like what? But it is scientifically shown that when we take time to breathe, it centers ourselves and it settles ourselves. It can really make the difference between feeling completely overwhelmed to being able to cope in the moment. And lastly is to remember, when you are having these overwhelming feelings, to remember that you're not alone. You're not. You have people around you. You have leaders that are sitting with you right now in life group. You have me. You have pastors at church, mentors. There's people. There's the National Suicide Hotline. There's counselors. There are people there to talk to you, to meet you, to help you. You don't have to go through a hurting world alone. You don't have to. If we've seen anything over the last few weeks, we've seen that Jesus is with us, that he journeys with us. He doesn't leave us alone. He doesn't shame or guilt us, but he's with us. And just a little side note, for those of you that may not be really experiencing these things, but you have friends who are, I just want to encourage you that sometimes what our friends are going through is a little over our pay grade, meaning that you don't have the skills and the ability to handle it on our own. So sometimes if you are fearful for a friend or you're concerned for a friend, can I encourage you to reach out to someone else? I've had to do it in my own life with students in the past where they've had situations where it's even above what I've known to do, and I've had to reach out to my boss. Reach out. Some things are not meant for you to carry on your shoulders for your friend. The best thing you can do for your friend is to bring someone in that can actually help them, that can actually help them take steps towards moving out of the way in which they are feeling in order to get the help that they really need and really desire. And so as a support system, as a friend, I would encourage you to do that. Friends, two things that I want to leave you with tonight as a little recap is one, get the help you need. If you need help, get the help you need. No shame, no guilt. Get the help that you need. Help others if they can't help themselves. Know when, as a friend, to reach out to someone else, to come alongside you and help your friend. They'll be the better off because of it. And second of all, know who you are. You are a child of the King. right? God sees you. He relishes in you. You are his beloveds. Know who you are. You're worth doing the hard work in order to get better. You're worth taking the steps, whatever those steps may be, towards living a life that is mentally and spiritually and physically healthy. You are not a mistake. You're not alone. You're not damaged goods. You're not a mess. You're not overreacting. You're not invisible. You are a child of God. And so in this hurting world, I pray that you remember those things and that you don't let the hurting world consume you, but that you take a step towards reaching out, towards knowing who you are and finding the help that you need. Friends, I love you. I can't wait to see you soon. Have a great night. We'll see you soon.